Welcome back to the channel. For the past year, I've been teaching you on the forehand and the backhand side what I call the kinetic whip model. And you've seen videos of me, cracking the whip and sending this tail end of the whip around in acceleration like I'm trying to teach you in tennis. And I've even shown you in the more common version, which is the towel snap. And so I want to go into how this works, particularly in the lower area of the body, but we'll talk about the upper part of the body as well. You notice that you've seen these in a lot of different places, this reference to the whip and the whip model, many videos on it. But the key motions of the whip are really not described in any detail. So there is a counter motion, a pulling back of the arm that sends the acceleration down to the tip, just like in the snapping of the towel. This pullback motion, this counter motion. And so I want to explain how that works really in the tennis swing. And I think the player who has exemplified this whip technique the best is Roger Federer. And I'm sure you've all seen Roger in the past warming up. And I'll post a video of this in the notes section, so if you haven't seen it, you can see it. And you see Roger very relaxed, half smiling, and he's standing very erect like this. And he's just doing this kind of loose action with his arm. And the ball is rifling around the court effortlessly, and he can do it on the backhand side too. But he's standing here very relaxed and nothing really much seems to be going on. But in my opinion, he's warming up his cracking the whip technique. And I'm going to show you the secrets of that today. So the first thing to note for most people, even though they kind of like the idea of cracking the whip and acceleration, etc., is they really don't understand it very well. And it really is hard to see, because taking a sort of a traditional forehand swing, I'm taking the racket back and it's kind of circling around my body forward towards the target and then turns around. I don't see any counter motion in that particularly, and the same on the backhand. Okay, so where is the counter motion? The counter movement that we saw with the snapping of the towel and the snapping of the whip. We'll get into that. And for those who have been asking about when we're going to cover the serve on this channel, it's coming soon, not next week, but it's coming. And all the principles that we're talking about even today, but throughout the whole series, cracking the whip being one of them, these principles are going to be incorporated in this new major serve series that I'll be rolling out. So you'll be learning ahead of time on the forehand and backhand, but we'll be applying these same techniques on the serve. So stay tuned for that. But let's get started on cracking the whip, the pelvic snap. There are two major segments of the kinetic chain involved with this cracking the whip. One is the whole arm complex, and one is the pelvis. So let's talk about the arm briefly, because we've covered this in many other videos. So before, in the very first series, in the forehand, I gave you this analogy, which still holds true today, which is that in the traditional tennis model, we have the advice to move the butt of the racket towards the target and extend our hand and racket through as long as we can towards the target in a linear way. So what this equates to is if you had a ski boat, let's say the ski boat's the tip of the handle here, and you had a skier here at the end, and the ski boat was pulling the skier straight ahead towards the target at 20 miles an hour. which is all we can move we can move our hand around our body 20 miles an hour. If the handle's going 20, obviously the skier is going 20. All the way up and through the target, it's a slow 20 mile an hour racket head speed. Not very powerful. This isn't the modern game. So what is the modern swing and the modern release like? Well, it's like the ski boat starts down, gains momentum, 20 miles an hour perhaps, as it starts to enter the contact zone. But then this boat suddenly slows down, and the hand slows down in the swing, and this boat suddenly makes a sharp turn left. So what does that do? Well, it sends the skier out on the ski path and accelerates them around the path through centrifugal force and the angular momentum in this turning action on the handle. So what was 20 miles an hour going straight, a racket head speed, with this turning and angular momentum, now this racket's traveling 60 to 80 miles an hour as it makes contact, which is what the modern game is all about. So it's a completely different technique and model to master. And some of you who've watched my series all along, or parts of it, may be going, yeah, I've seen this idea before, but yeah, so what am I supposed to do with it? Well, you have to have the correct movement map in your head before you can move correctly. So if your movement map is this linear pushing, slow path into contact, that's where you're going to end up, slow and pushy, and even inconsistent contact for a lot of other reasons. So even today, after you watch this, you can go out and test this yourself. So if you're saying, Kim, the racket is not extended through contact and we don't push straight ahead, what do? Well, what we do is start thinking about turning this racket as we start to enter the contact zone, and we let this contact be released and freely rotate in this path that I'm showing you, a windshield wiper path. And we don't resist it. We don't try to stop it and then go at the end. Right from the beginning, right from the slot, we're thinking that way. And we're thinking of really torquing our body and then torquing the handle around. And the path of the racket is coming around here to the left. In golf, they call it exiting left. So you have to have the mental idea and map in your head already as you start that I'm going to be exiting left, not pushing straight ahead. And you can test this today as you go out and do some warm-ups, is just think about this turning action and letting that go and see how much faster and how much more consistent you hit. Because as this turns, it's going to be squaring to contact much better than this kind of pushy action, this inconsistent arm pushing action. And yes, we're talking about adding the body, torquing, coiling, uncoiling to this turning action. But just today, you can just think about this move here, this exiting left with the maximum speed, and see how it changes your shot. That's just the first day. There's many more things to come. I want to highlight this point and make it into a new immutable law. I know in my last immutable laws video, we had a lot of comments and likes, and I appreciate that. Thank you. So what is the sixth immutable law? We had 5 up till now. What's the sixth one? The sixth one is the harder you release correctly, the straighter the shot. So this sixth immutable law is completely contrary to the common sense view of most players, recreational and some pros, which is the way we get consistent contact is slow down, deaccelerate the racket through contact. Be careful, do manipulation here to make sure that you get the shot in. This law is completely contrary to that. So to understand this sixth immutable law, we have to look at the corollaries of the law. So the first corollary is, first, you can't consciously control or manipulate the moment of contact. It's way too fast. I've talked about this before, and I'll post a video of another top golf instructor 30 seconds telling you the same thing, is that, you know, you only have just a fraction of a millisecond, a couple of milliseconds between the entering the contact zone and contact. It's way, way too fast for you to consciously think about what to do and then send from your brain to your arm to your body to try to change that. And you'll only completely foul up your swinging and stroking that way. You would need more than the fastest supercomputer in the world and the fastest reaction in the world in order to be able to control or manipulate contact. So for the second corollary of this immutable law is that for right-handed players, the racket head exits left at the turn of the swing. So what is the turn of the swing? I've talked about this many, many times, but basically as we start from the slot, we're starting with the momentum out to the right with the handle pointed out to the right, but then we reach a point where the body then is really torquing and turning actively. The hips are firing, we'll talk about, and then the chest fires. And this is the beginning of the turn of the swing around the body. And we're exiting left for a right-handed player, in golf, baseball, and tennis, we're exiting left. And again, this is counterintuitive, counter common sense. Because common sense for a beginner is that the target is there towards the camera. I have this racket in my hand and I need to swing towards the target and direct the racket head towards the target as long as I can. That's going to give me control and what I want to do in this sport. And at a very, beginner level, it does. But we're not at that level. We're trying for a much more advanced level. So, it's something to think about this idea of common sense, and your, untrained intuition is often wrong. For thousands of years, people thought that the way to fly for humans would be to flap our wings like the birds. And for thousands of years, we, in our common sense observation, observed a flat earth and we thought the earth was flat. But both of these are dead wrong. And so is this idea of swinging to the target. It's dead wrong for a more advanced player. So what is right thinking on the swing? Again, I've said it many times, but I'll say it again, is that we have to build the correct movement map in our brain right from the beginning as we enter the slot. Is what it is that we're doing. We're swinging out around our body in a rotational action, powered by the rotation of the body, and that we're going to have a arcing, spiraling action with the racket. And it's not something that we should manipulate or resist right from the beginning as a slot. We should be having this built into our idea, and that the faster we release in this correct way, the more consistent the contact. It's just the opposite of what we think. We think we have to slow things down, but it's just exactly the opposite. If we let this be done correctly, the faster we swing, the harder we release, the straighter the hit. This is what all the top ball strikers in golf say. So more technically, why is this a more consistent? Because the face of the racket is following, the head of the racket is following this arcing path, and that the kind of swinging that we're talking about keeps the racket face squarer to the contact path longer, making it much more easy to make consistent contact rather than this snapping, flipping action that we see so often. So there are physical laws involved here that we won't go too far into it, but you'll often hear this term in other instruction as the club head stays square to the path. Square to the path, not trying to square contact with a flipping action. So another way traditional tennis gets this all wrong, and I've seen many videos, even recent, about this, is that there's some understanding that this linear path is very slow, okay? And so how do they make up for that? Well, they tell the student to have a loose wrist And then as you start to approach contact, to pronate early and snap this racket through in a flipping or rolling over action. And at slower speeds and warming up, after a practice, you can hit a decent shot, even a powerful shot that way. But there's no way at higher speeds and higher competition that this flipping, swinging gate action at the end of your swing is going to produce high quality tennis. It's going to produce many more errors than are necessary. So what should be our thought process instead of this early pronation, early flipping? And I've seen many players 4-5 and above, if they film themselves and are being honest, this is how they release the racket. They do it more skillfully, yes, but they're still flipping. So what you see in the modern swing, and I just described this on the forehand because we can't go into everything, as I said, in this approach to the contact zone, the forearm is supinated and the racket is laid back and the hand is extended, the wrist is extended back, and that the rotation of the body then brings this structure up and through contact, and at contact the hand is still bent back like this, still extended. This is going to represent a much more stable way of making contact than this horizontal flipping swinging gate action. And if you look at any top level pro picture, and they always have the guy, the pro, in this position, at contact, the chest is rotated 20 degrees or so left, maybe less sometimes, but the arm is brought up and the wrist position is laid back, because this is going to provide us the stable way to pass through contact in the milliseconds that we have it. And the same bent back wrist position is exactly what we have in all swinging sports at contact at a high level. So in golf, we come down here and the trail hand is positioned like this with a bent back wrist. And yes, as we reach contact and extend our arms, this pronates over, but it's a very last second as we're coming into contact, not early on that most players have, which is this flipping action. And in baseball, the same way. So we get into the contact zone, and in the contact with baseball, this wrist is extended back, because this is going to provide, again, the ability to transmit the rotating power of the body into this swing without flipping or rolling over, which are the death knells of a good swing. So these have very profound effects upon your game, and they're not something that can be learned overnight, but they can be learned. Apply yourself 5, 10, 15 minutes deliberately, as I've said in the past, and you can transform these poor techniques into good techniques. So having said all this, you may be asking still, where's the counter movement in the swinging action in terms of the arm? Well, this is the counter motion. So as the racket is being moved forward into the beginning part of the swing, and the handle's pointed out to the right, which should be, okay? But then instead of what's being recommended is the hand and the racket are extended out towards the target, there is a turning back, just like the ski boat. This handle is turning backwards towards me as I go through contact. And we let this and encourage this pull back. And this snapping back of the handle going this way sends the racket accelerating around that way. So there's the snapping back. And there's more elements to this. I'm giving you the basics. But in terms of the arm, this is the snapping back action that we have in the arm. So the title of this is Cracking the Whip, the Pelvic Snap. So now we're going to be talking about the lower body, especially the pelvis. And here I have a life-size model of an adult human pelvis. And the first thing you see is how big and massive it is, massive bones. And it's attached on the rear side to our glutes or butt, massive muscles. And down below with our legs, these are the femurs going into the pelvis. We have our thighs and our quads, massive muscles. And then here, going up our lower part of our spine, we have the core of our body, massive muscles. So this is the central transmission point and acceleration point for energy moving up from the ground into our upper body. But, why don't we see more about training the pelvis? I can't remember a tennis video instruction that even mentions the word pelvis in the title. I think this is the first, and that's fine. So why don't we hear more about pelvis and pelvis training? Well, there's a couple major reasons. One is a cultural bias against thinking about the pelvic area. In our culture, it's generally associated with something dirty and something offensive in some way. So we tend to avoid looking at it and talking about it and using it, really. The famous dance teacher, Irmgard Bartiev, called that the space here, between in our pelvis, the dead 7 inches, is that the trained athletes and dancers who came to her to be trained, when she first looked at them, they had no skill and no movement, athletic movement in their pelvis area. So what are the implications of that? So I've said in the past that the kinetic chain that powers the modern swing has 32 rotating segments from the bottom of our feet all the way out to our fingers. And I said that traditional tennis only focuses mostly on the arm. So there's 5 segments here: the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist, the hand, and the fingers all have different elements and speeds of rotation that we put to use if we're good. And the only other segment that gets any attention in traditional tennis is the feet. Oh yeah, you got to have good footwork and training exercise on footwork, which is all true. So that's 5 segments in the arm and 1 segment on the foot. Let's say that's 6 segments. But there are 32 segments in the kinetic chain. So I would say that we have a dead 26 segments in tennis instruction and tennis thinking. We don't give it any thought. We don't train them athletically. We don't train them skillfully. One of the things I admire most about Novak Djokovic, and one of the reasons I think he's won more Grand Slams than any player in history, is that he systematically trained his whole body. When he first came out, as you remember, he had terrible footwork. He couldn't approach the net. He couldn't volley. He couldn't serve. A whole bunch of things. Well, but he systematically went through and fixed all those things and, turned into, this Superman of tennis. I think there's a good contrast with American tennis, which we haven't had a man Grand Slam winner since, 20 years ago with Andy Roddick. Why? Well, I would say that part of our system is not training the entire body to be athletic. And our players are only partial athletes when they get out there. And that's going to create all kinds of weaknesses on the court when at a higher level. So my pitch is to the industry is let's think about and train all 32 segments of the kinetic chain. Today we're going to be really focused on one of the most important in the lower body, which is the pelvis. And I'll say one more philosophic thing about this idea is I've said in the past that the kind of training that I'm recommending and the path that you pursue can kind of change your life. It's not just about swinging a tennis racket. Well, what did I mean? Well, I talked about how, if we start to gain skill in these different areas of our body that we didn't have before, we sort of activate them. They were dead and now they're alive and now they're skillful and now they're efficient. And that makes us feel good, intrinsically makes us feel alive. And, I've also talked about how, the contact is the zen of contact, is that we work with the laws of physics, which I talk about a lot, of course, even today with the ski boat and angular momentum and centrifugal force. If we work with those laws instead of against them, we're going to be better and enjoy our sport at a much higher level instead of always fighting against the laws of physics. So learning about this path, it can change your life, and kind of reawakening of a lot of different things. And I'll leave the religious note there at the end, but, give it some thought. So throughout our series on the forehand and backhand, I've talked about 3 phases of the swing. that there's a loading phase. We're shifting our weight and pressure into our trail side. And then I've talked about this middle phase, this transition phase, which I call the Bermuda Triangle, because it's been missing in most tennis instruction, where in traditional tennis instruction, once you're loaded on the back, you're encouraged to drive your hitting side, your fire and load and explode, bring the right side and the right thing as aggressively and fast as possible. And that's a very poor technique, and it creates all kinds of problems, as I've described. So I've described this, once we make the loading phase, the transition, the loading into the trail side and the pressure into the trail side, we need a recentering move. It's sort of a lateral shift down, you know, where we're recentering our torso and sinking into the ground, and both legs are equally weighted, but with some momentum going into the lead side, but not extending over it, because we're going to be pivoting and posting on that lead leg. So, you know, the pelvis, you know, has this bowl shape, and as we turn back, as I've described on the side, in closed stance now, this pelvis is rotating up, so the right side is higher than the left side by an inch or two. But in the recentering move, as I move forward with my body and sink, the pelvis recenters and sinks. Now both sides are level, along with my shoulders being level and my torso over the center of my pelvis. That's the transition move with how it looks, you know, if you were looking just at the pelvis, a skeleton. You can look online and see the same thing. So we're talking about what happens to create the crack of the whip and the counter motion in the lower body. So this is how it works. So after the recentering move, then with the lead of the front side of the pelvis, the left side of your right-handers, coming forward and sinking and recentering, then, and the pelvis is oriented in a closed stance out to the side here, then we have to have a rotation, and this is the snapping open of the pelvis, and it's done with the pushing and sinking of these legs, pushing back against the ground. And as I showing here with my feet here, as I step back, as I'm pushing back, and the heels of both feet rotate back to some degree, and bringing this up closer so you can see it, the lead side of the pelvis counter rotates. It goes back this way. So I'm pushing back, I'm posting on my left leg, and this is pushing back and around. And the sacrum, or tailbone, is also pushing back and away from the target, okay? That's the counter motion. Tremendous power of this counter motion, but what also happens is the trail side of the pelvis and the trail hip then are rotated forward and more open to contact, like this. Not all the way, because there's not that much range of motion. But this snap here, this tremendous snap, this tremendous engine of power we have in the swing, and it can't be done without a pelvic snapping motion open. That involves a counter rotation of the rest of the pelvis. So that's the snap of the pelvis. And there's specific ways that we move our feet to accomplish that. And once the pelvis is snapped, and the energy then flows up and around to the hitting side and up to the torso, then after the pelvis stops, then the chest rotation takes over. And all of this snapping energy from the pelvis is transmitted to the rotating chest, and we come up into contact. And so this is one of the main power engines that we have in our body that we're not paying attention to. Of course, on the backhand, we have, works essentially exactly the same. You know, the body is turned away from the target, pelvis is turned away from the target in our footwork and reorientation we've talked about. But then as we have this transition slide down and recentering move, now the pelvis and the legs are fully loaded, and then we have the snapping of the pelvis. And this is the Wawrinka main engine power and the Gasquet main engine power that we've described in detail in previous backhand videos. So on the backhand side, this snapping open, then powers the rotation of the rest of the body and torso and arm through contact. In a moment, we'll move inside the studio to look at some pros doing this pelvic snapping and really isolating that action so you can see it clearly. And so after that video analysis, we'll go to our deliberate practice or how-to section. And I know that there are a few of you out there that tend to skip that section, and I can only keep encouraging you to watch. But even if you don't go into that section today after seeing this beginning part, I'd like you to try to go out today after you've seen this and do a little bit of this snapping action with your pelvis and with your arm. But one of the keys is that we keep our trail leg back instead of letting the rotate towards the target with our arm. And you can see this in all the videos, is that there's this pushing back motion of the trail leg in various ways, so infinite variation. But even with Roger, you'll see when he's snapping that this trail leg stays back and behind. And on big shots, like inside out shots, this trail leg is really loaded and there's really tremendous power generated in this rotation. Not always, because we can't always be loaded. You know, we just try to get loaded, but we're on the defensive or returning and we're just reaching for balls, and that's the best we can do. But when we can get loaded, you know, we want to start thinking about more of this loading of the pelvis. And there's, again, all kinds of variations because the body is moving around in space so many different ways. And you'll see sometimes what looks like a bowling move. So bowlers on a slippery surface will toss this 12-pound ball and this right leg will kick back behind them. And we see the same thing on forehands and backhands. This back leg kicking back. Not always, but it always sort of remains back because we want the pelvis to snap open. We don't want a slow turning of the pelvis, which gives us no speed. We want this rotational energy injected into the system and then transmitted up the kinetic chain. We don't want to move all in one unitary piece. So when you're going out today and warming up, just think about pushing back and keeping this back leg back when you're hitting your forehands and backhands. That's all. And see if you can feel that pelvic snap a little bit more. And hopefully that will encourage you to go further into this detail and train more on this area. Here we are back in Goat Studio to watch a few Roger Federer backhand and forehand pelvic snap actions. And this will be brief, as we've already covered the movement map of the pelvic snap and the cracking of the whip in some detail. But before watching the video, it's important that I again highlight the difference in the different swinging sports. Tennis is a moving swinging sport, and it's different than the stationary swinging sports of golf and baseball. We don't see a pelvic snap in every tennis swing, as the player is often on the defensive, especially on returns, or is running, and there is no time to get loaded and swing. Hence, there is little or no pelvic snap in many tennis swings. That said, it's important that tennis players do work on their pelvic snap technique when they have a chance to get loaded and to hit a more effective shot than when they were on the defensive or on the run. In this first Federer backhand video, I'll play the entire backhand through once and then 3 repeat shots of just the pelvic snap action. You'll see Roger execute a rally backhand shot, perhaps a little on the defensive, so his kickback action of his trail leg is not as pronounced as it might be on a big offensive backhand. But you clearly see how the trail leg and foot slides behind him. There is some pushback with the trail foot, but again, not as pronounced as it might be on an offensive backhand shot where he's really snapping his pelvis at full power. Now, watching Roger hitting a rally forehand shot here, you'll see the entire action first, and then 3 repeat clips of the pelvic action. You see the slight spring into the air as his pelvis snap powers him into his swing, and you see the classic scissor action and pivot back of the tailbone and the pivot back of both heels in this pelvic snap action. Again,
You will see 100 slight variations of this pelvic snap to power the tennis swing. But when the modern player gets a chance to get loaded, you will almost always see this pelvic snap to crack the whip in the modern swing.
So now we're in the how-to or deliberate practice section of our video. And as usual, I have to caution you about injury prevention as you start your training. So if you're injured or sore, don't do these exercises. If you feel pain or soreness when you're doing this exercise, stop immediately. Do all the exercises correctly. Enables healthy joint movement and things that'll save you from injury. And start the exercise program slowly. You know, do things, feel them out, feel the movements out, then speed them up. That's always the process, but don't jump full bore into anything. In this first set of practice exercises, I want you just to get a feeling for cracking the whip from the arm perspective. And remember, we talked about in the earlier sections how we want to have a movement map built into our thought process from the very beginning. We don't want to come to the crucial moments of the swing and decide that we're consciously going to do something. So we have to be thinking about this spiral action, this rotational swing action right from the beginning and build that motion into everything that we do. So on the forehand side, I want you to just start out easy and thinking about this rotational swing instead of this linear swing that you might have or some variation of it. And we're going to come out on the forehand side with our forearms supinated back and the racket laid back till we get here to the turn of the swing where our hips and chest are starting to fire more aggressively. And then as we enter contact, we still want an extended wrist touching the ball essentially first thing like this. So we don't want to be flipping the racket through contact. And so we're turning into this with an extended wrist. And then as we're passing through, we're snapping the handle back the other way. And we're not going to resist that motion. We're going to, in fact, increase it and encourage it. So no more pushing out the hand and the racket towards the target, but an exiting left motion. We're really feeling the racket handle come back. So I want you to start off by just doing 10 medium-paced swings on the forehand side and the backhand side. Similar on the backhand side, we're laying the racket back and down, and then we're going to be snapping, we're going to be exiting right on the backhand and snapping this handle back this way. So we're built that into our model, and as we go through contact, we're going to snap and exit right on the backhand. So do 10 slow motion reps on the forehand and backhand side, or excuse me, 10 medium reps, because it's hard to do this in slow motion. So you feel some speed as you go through here, but we're not overdoing it on the backhand, forehand side. So I'll pause the video for 10 forehand and backhand medium reps on this. And as we usually do in these progressions in deliberate practice, we go from slow, medium, fast. So now I want you to do 10 reps on the forehand and backhand side. And we're going to go fast, and we're going to build this model in from everything we begin, this rotational model, and then as we get through contact, we're really going to use our body and our arm to snap that through and reverse that handle back like the ski boat turning left on the forehand side. That will accelerate the racket around and through. Backhand, exit right, the same principle, accelerating through. So I'll pause the video for 10 fast reps of cracking the whip, just shadow swing. So in our past forehand and backhand series, we've had plenty of instruction about the swinging action through contact, backhand and forehand side. In this particular video, we're focusing on the pelvic area, remember? So That's enough shadow work on the hand and racket motion. Now we're focusing on the pelvis. And so on the forehand side, the very first set of exercises on the forehand and backhand side will be simply to try to keep this trail hip and leg back as we swing, instead of letting it come around in some fashion. Even a little bit is bad. So we're really trying to have a counter motion. And so going easy now, medium speed on the forehand, then medium speed on the backhand. I just want you to shadow swing and try to focus all your attention on keeping this trail leg back and stationary essentially. And then letting our body rotate through on that. The very first exercise, keep the trail foot back. Don't let it start to come around as you start to swing. So 10 medium speed reps, keeping the trail foot back on the forehand and the backhand side. You can use any stance you like. I recommend maybe starting with a closed stance on the forehand. Backhand, of course, we turn more away and are oriented much more left of the target, showing our back to the camera. And that's really the beginning position. So pausing the video now for 10 medium speed. Keep your trail foot back exercises. Now moving on to another level of sophistication on this technique is when we're really getting loaded, we're not just keeping our trail foot back, but we're pushing back with both feet, and we're moving our pelvis to the rear anyway, backwards. And that's going to bring the right hip up and through the hitting process. But we don't want to do that prematurely or early. So no load and explode concept. It's pushing back and pushing up. Because as we get through contact, we're going to be elevating our pelvis. So how do we experience this and feel this? Is just without a racket now, the first set of exercises is just see if we can, standing forehand closed position now, and with some little bit more weight to the trail side than the front side, as we might if we're loading. And we just want to do a little helicopter push and jump back action. And that's going to be a lot more dynamic than just keeping your legs still. So I'm going to pause the video on the backhand side. It's very similar. So we're going to be jumping backwards, doing the backward helicopter on the backhand side. Just 10 of those so you can just have the basic understanding and feeling of that motion through your pelvis. So I'll pause the video for 10 without a racket helicopter reverse pivots. Now that we've done the reverse helicopter move without the racket, let's pick up our racket. And this next series, just at medium speed, I want you to try to combine this hop and push back with an arm swing. We're not caring too much about the arm swing, we're just trying to feel this hop and reverse pivot before we swing forward. So 10 medium speed on the forehand, on the backhand side where you're doing a little push back and jump, and then swinging, and try to integrate these a little bit better. Of course the jump comes, push back comes before the swing, but closely timed together. So you pause between each rep, see if you could sync them up a little bit better. I'll pause the video. Now you got the basic feeling for it. Now I want you to do that same exercise more at full speed. So here we're going to be more dynamic with the jumping and leaping back move, the helicopter move. And we're going to be swinging a little bit harder. So 10 fast reps, forehand, backhand side, using the pushback or helicopter leap back, if you will. Maybe get some air. See how you do. 10 reps, I'll pause the video. And once you get comfortable with these new movements, practicing them at home or on the court, 5, 10, 15 minutes a day, just working on just this little motion, you can improve dramatically, as I've been saying. But it takes, probably a week of this kind of training before you get comfortable with it. Once you're comfortable with it, then, of course, take it out to the court in a deliberate way where you're not doing a lot of running around the court and maybe someone is hand feeding you, like I've demonstrated many times, and you're just going to be focused on those 3 moves, keeping the leg back, little helicopter jump, and the lateral slide. Just hand-fed balls till you get more of a feeling for it, and increase the complexity after that. But that's the progression. It's going to take you a couple of weeks to move all the way through that progression, but take your time and enjoy the process, and start watching the videos of people doing this. And that's it on our cracking the whip and the pelvic snap lesson today. Before I go on, I want to remind you that we have this great new serve series coming up on the channel. Not next week, but soon. It's going to be major. So stay tuned for that. But back to the pelvic snap, I want to bring up a story of the comedian Larry David, who's one of my favorites. And there's a famous routine that he does where some guest of his has set down a wet glass on an expensive wood table. And Larry's very upset about that, and he looks each guest in the eye and says, "Do you respect the wood?" Trying to find out who was the guest that was guilty of ruining his table. Well, in today's lesson, I would talk about respecting the pelvis, especially since culturally, as I said before, one of the top dance teachers called this area of the pelvis the dead 7 inches in our culture, where we just have a uncomfortable feeling about even talking about it, much less training it. But we shouldn't. So I want you to take that idea of respecting the pelvis, and when you go out on the courts today, you see your pals running around, and you will inevitably see most of them extending their right hip and right side through contact too quickly and too soon. It's called early extension. It does all kinds of bad things to your swing. We've talked about those in the past. Instead, we want a back leg staying back or kicking back or sliding back, and a snapping of the pelvis. So if you see one of your pals doing this unitary early extension of the right side, dragging that through, come up to them and look them in the eye like Larry David and ask them, "Do you respect the pelvis?" And maybe they won't understand what you mean, probably not. And then you can just basically tell them that we got to stop, running through the ball, as traditional tennis calls it. Sometimes it's running through the ball, but mostly it's this early rotation of the trail side and the arm into the contact zone before we snap the pelvis. So after you've demonstrated how we shouldn't run through the ball and extend our pelvis and our right side through the contact zone early, just tell them, respect the pelvis, walk away, let them think about the error of their ways.